The fall of the Romanovs, blood, diamonds, and betrayal. The golden cage, the hook, and the empire. Imagine a wealth so vast, it is impossible to count. Imagine a palace where the walls are lined with amber, the plates are made of solid gold, and the children play with diamonds as if they were marbles. This was not a fairy tale. This was the reality of the Romanov family in 1913. They were the absolute rulers of Russia, the owners of 1/6 of the Earth's land surface. Tsar Nicholas II was, by modern standards, a trillionaire. He was a man who loved his wife, Empress Alexandra, with a passion that defied royal protocol. They had everything a human being could dream of: unlimited power, unimaginable luxury, and a beautiful family of 4 daughters and 1 son. But beneath the gold and the glamour, a clock was ticking. Beneath the silk dresses of the Grand Duchesses, a dark secret was festering. And outside the palace gates, in the freezing mud of Russia, a storm was gathering that would wash away 300 years of history in a river of blood. They thought they were chosen by God. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. Welcome to History's Echo, where the whispers of the past become the lessons of today. We dig deep into the archives to bring you the stories that shaped our world. Stories of power, passion, and the price of ambition. I am your host, and today we are opening the heavy doors of the Winter Palace to witness the heartbreaking end of the last dynasty. To understand the tragedy, you must first understand the love. Unlike most royal marriages, which were political arrangements, Nicholas and Alexandra were deeply, hopelessly in love. Their letters to each other read like the diary of teenagers. When Nicholas became Tsar at age 26, he was unprepared. He was a soft man in a brutal world. He famously said, "I am not prepared to be a Tsar. I never wanted to become one. I know nothing of the business of ruling," but rule he did. The Romanovs lived in isolation. To the American public and the European courts, they were the picture of perfection. 4 beautiful daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, dressed in white, like angels. And finally, the heir, the boy who would be king, Alexei. But Alexei was the source of their greatest nightmare. He was born with hemophilia, the royal disease. His blood would not clot. A simple bruise could kill him. A nosebleed could be a death sentence. This was a state secret. If the Russian people knew their future king was weak, the dynasty would collapse. The Empress Alexandra, a desperate mother, watched her son scream in agony for days, unable to help him. Doctors failed, science failed. And when science fails, desperation opens the door to madness. Desperation opened the door for a man who smelled of goats, smoke, and sin. A man who would hammer the final nail into the Romanovs' coffin. The devil in the palace, Rasputin. Enter Grigory Rasputin. History has painted him as a monster, a sorcerer, a sex-crazed maniac, and in many ways he was all of these things. He was a wandering peasant, a holy man from Siberia who claimed to have a direct line to God. He had piercing, hypnotic eyes that terrified men and seduced women. When he arrived in St. Petersburg, high society was bored and looking for spiritual entertainment. Rasputin became their new toy, but he had a singular talent. He could stop the bleeding. One night, the little prince Alexei was dying. The doctors had given up. In hysteria, the empress sent for Rasputin. He walked into the room, prayed, and reportedly told the mother, "Don't let the doctors bother him." Miraculously, the bleeding stopped. The boy survived. From that moment on, Rasputin owned the soul of the empress. She believed he was sent by God. She called him our friend. He was given free access to the palace. But outside the royal chambers, Rasputin was living a life of debauchery. He drank until he passed out. He slept with the wives of aristocrats, and he bragged, "I have the Russian Empire in my pocket." The scandal was explosive. The newspapers couldn't print the truth about the prince's illness, so they printed rumors instead. They whispered that Rasputin was sleeping with the empress. They drew cartoons of the Tsar being a puppet on Rasputin's lap. The Russian people, who were starving and poor, looked at their Tsar and saw a weak man controlled by a bearded peasant. The aristocracy hated him. They saw him as a cancer destroying the monarchy. In 1916, a group of nobles, led by Prince Yusupov, decided to kill the beast. But killing Rasputin proved to be as difficult as understanding him. They invited him to a basement for wine and cakes. The cakes were laced with enough cyanide to kill 5 men. Rasputin ate them all. He didn't die. He asked for wine. They gave him poisoned wine. He drank it. He didn't die. Terrified, the prince shot him in the chest. Rasputin fell. But when the prince checked the body, Rasputin's eyes flew open, and he grabbed the prince by the throat, whispering, "You bad boy!" He was shot again, beaten, and finally thrown into the freezing Neva River. When his body was found, water was in his lungs. He was still alive when he hit the water. But before he died, Rasputin wrote a letter to the Tsar, a prophecy. He wrote, "If I am killed by common men, you and your children will rule for centuries. But if I am killed by your relations, by the nobles, then none of your family will remain alive for more than 2 years." The prophecy was terrifyingly accurate. The world on fire, war and abdication. While the palace was consumed by the drama of Rasputin, the world was consumed by fire. World War I had begun. Nicholas, wanting to prove his strength, made a fatal mistake. He left the capital to command the army on the front lines. He left the government in the hands of his German-born wife, Alexandra. This was a PR disaster. The people believed the Empress was a German spy. With the Tsar gone, the economy collapsed. Inflation skyrocketed. Bread disappeared from the shelves. In America, people were driving cars and building skyscrapers. In Russia, peasants were starving to death in the snow. By 1917, the people had had enough. It wasn't a military coup, it was a hunger riot. Women marched in the streets demanding bread. Soldiers who were ordered to shoot the women instead turned their guns on their officers. The Russian Revolution had begun. On a train stopped in the middle of nowhere, generals forced Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate. He gave up the throne, not for himself, but to save his country. He thought he would be allowed to live quietly on a farm in England or Crimea. He was naive. The family was arrested. The transition from absolute power to prisoner was brutal. They were moved to a mansion in Siberia, then to a gloomy house in Yekaterinburg called the House of Special Purpose. The name was a lie. It wasn't special, it was a death trap. The windows were painted white so they couldn't see outside. A tall fence was built around the house. The guards were hostile Bolsheviks who mocked the girls, drawing dirty pictures on the bathroom walls. The family had to eat plain soldiers' rations. Yet, through it all, Nicholas and Alexandra remained dignified. They prayed, they taught the children history, and they waited for a rescue that would never come. The night of horror, the execution, July 16, 1918, a warm summer night in Siberia. The White Army, those loyal to the Tsar, was approaching the city. The gunfire could be heard in the distance. The Bolsheviks knew that if the Tsar was rescued, he would become a symbol to rally the anti-communist forces. Vladimir Lenin from Moscow gave the secret order. At 1:30 a.m., the family was woken up. They were told there was chaos in the city, and they needed to be moved to the basement for their safety. Nicholas carried his sickly son Alexei in his arms. The Empress walked with her head high. The 4 girls, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, followed, carrying small pillows. They didn't know that inside those pillows and sewn into their corsets were kilograms of diamonds, pearls, and gold jewelry. They had hidden the family fortune on their bodies, hoping to use it to buy their freedom later. They were led into a small, empty room in the basement. They asked for chairs. 2 chairs were brought for Nicholas and Alexandra. The children stood behind them. A photographer was supposed to come, they were told. Instead, Yakov Yurovsky, the commander of the execution squad, entered the room with a group of armed men. He read a short order. Due to the fact that your relatives are continuing their attack on Soviet Russia, the Ural Executive Committee has decided to execute you. Nicholas, confused, turned and said, "What? What?" Yurovsky didn't answer. He raised his pistol and shot the Tsar point blank in the chest. Nicholas fell dead instantly. The room exploded in chaos. The guards opened fire. The air filled with smoke and the screams of women. But then, something strange happened. The bullets seemed to bounce off the girls. The executioners were terrified, thinking it was divine intervention. It wasn't God, it was the diamonds. The layers of jewels sewn into their corsets acted like bulletproof vests. The girls were wounded but alive, huddling in the corner, crying. The horror that followed is too graphic for detail, but it ended with bayonets. The basement floor was slippery with royal blood. The 300-year-old dynasty was wiped out in 20 minutes of chaotic violence. The lost gold and the echoes, the aftermath. The bodies were stripped, burned with acid, and buried in a secret pit in the forest. The Bolsheviks announced that only the Tsar had been killed and the family was sent away. This lie fueled the mystery for decades. Rumors spread instantly. Anastasia escaped. The son is alive. Throughout the 20th century, dozens of women came forward claiming to be the Grand Duchess Anastasia. The most famous was Anna Anderson, who lived in the USA and knew intimate details of life in the palace. Movies were made, books were written. The world wanted to believe that one of them had survived the horror. It wasn't until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 that the grave was found. DNA testing confirmed the identities. And finally, in 2007, the missing bodies of Alexei and Maria were found in a separate grave nearby. Science proved what hope had denied. No one survived. But what about the wealth? The Bolsheviks seized millions in gold, art, and palaces. But rumors persist that vast amounts of Romanov gold were moved to foreign bank accounts in London and Berlin before the revolution, accounts that have never been claimed. The diamonds sewn into the corsets were scavenged by the executioners. But were they all accounted for? Today, the Romanovs are saints in the Russian Orthodox Church. The site of the execution is now a magnificent cathedral. History has judged Nicholas as a weak ruler but a good man, and his family as innocent victims of a changing world. The story of the Romanovs is a lesson for all of us. It teaches us that money cannot buy safety, that power is fragile, and that even the most golden of cages is still just a cage. The echoes of those gunshots in the Siberian basement still ring today. It was the brutal birth of the Soviet Union and the tragic death of an era of romance. What do you think? Was the execution of the children necessary for the revolution? Or was it a cold-blooded war crime? And do you believe all the gold was found? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please share it. For more deep dives into the shadows of the past, make sure to subscribe to History's Echo. Until next time, keep listening to the past, the end.